I'd like to ask you a question about the Europe say versus do problem.
You go back to 1982, and we'll just use the Royal Navy as an example. They had to barely scrape together a task force to take back the Falkland Islands. And the Royal Navy was much larger in 82 than it is today. And a lot of the arguments that brought that about sound real familiar. I remember I was just a baby JO in the late 80s, early 90s when I read something. I've been looking for it for years online. And if any of your listeners know where to find it, please let me know. It was a discussion about how the RAF explained to the defense establishment in the UK in the late 70s how this will sound familiar, how carriers were obsolete and everything that needed to get done could be done by air bases. And that's one reason why they were just a few months away from not even having the one of the carriers down there in the South Atlantic. And the French Navy was also very large. The Dutch and the Danes, well, the Dutch still have submarines, or they've lost their ability to indigenously build their own. But the Danes had submarines. We had a real robust military in Europe that we know that we could always rely on, and they knew that if they needed to do something on their own, like they had to do occasionally, they could always act on their own. Well, here we find ourselves in 2026, and there's a certain inertia to assumptions where we just assume our allies can do something. And you see announcements like, oh, the French carrier is getting underway with a European strike group to go help defend Cyprus because the Brits can't even get one destroyer underway. And that's great and that's wonderful. But especially as Americans, for instance, we just had one of our carriers get underway from Norfolk to head east to hopefully relieve the Ford and her crew so she could come home. The French don't have that ability. They have one carrier. Some of their allied units are really nice. Like, for instance, the Spanish contribution to the French strike group that headed to the Eastern Med is one of their F-100 class Aegis air defense destroyers. Really nice piece of kit, but there just aren't that many. So they can do this one deployment, but they have no follow-on. They have no endurance. And even they themselves still have this inertia of a memory of a military that could do things. And it's simply not there anymore. So you have to be very careful what you hoist on board coming from Europe, because a lot of what they are proposing or saying is not really what is best. It's what is capable. It's what they are able to do. We make fun of the strongly worded letter, but if that's all you have, that's what you lean on. If you want things to delay and push to the right and to wait for a UN meeting or an EU meeting, then that's what you're going to do because you don't have the capability to do anything you want to do from a military perspective. And even though it's very laudable in the last few months, with I think maybe one exception, maybe two exceptions, by the end of this calendar year, all of our NATO allies will be at the minimum 2% of GDP that was established almost 10 years ago. That's great. That's wonderful. But what can they actually do with that? In some ways, that is something that's on them and they need to evaluate themselves. But I think it's also very important for the US to take into consideration, because even if they had the desire to do more on the stage, especially at sea, they simply do not have the ability. There's a lot of our assumptions that we have, everything from minesweeping to escort ships to replenishment, etc. You go back 15 years ago, I think it was, maybe a bit more. Mike Mullen, when he was CNO, which was well over 15 years ago, he had the 1,000-ship Navy, and that still echoes now and then. Do we really have allies that have a 1,000-ship Navy? And even when they do, for instance, in the Red Sea, the horrible nightmare of October 7th to the side, if you just want to look at it from a practical point of view, the operational experience that we and our European friends have had in the Red Sea, that unscheduled range time, it's going to make all of us better. And one of the things we've discovered is the Danes they're only a population of 6 million and change. Small Navy, but very professional, very effective. and one of their top line units went into the Red Sea, all of a sudden they realized that their hardware could not communicate with the German radars, because we won't mention names to protect the guilty, but we've all seen how some exercises can be gamed, where perfect conditions, perfect scenario, everything's lined up, all the systems are tweaked, all the CAS reps are fit. So it works wonderful, but it's not quite the fleet standard. Same thing is everybody loves the precious few of the British Type 45 destroyers. HMS Dragon was one of the ones that they were trying to get underway to go protect the Cyprus bases in recent news. But in order to save just a little bit of money, they ignored all those hard fought lessons that they had from the Falklands War. And they managed to save a little money by not buying the software, which would enable their general purpose 4.5-inch gun forward to be able to take out air targets. So unlike everybody else in the Red Sea, he could take out the Shaheed and the other low-level drones with relatively inexpensive 76 millimeter or 5-inch rounds. They couldn't use their main gun. So that's kind of what I was trying to go for that say versus do problem. Is a lot of what the Europeans are saying just cannot be backed up because they have so under-resourced their militaries. And a lot of what they're saying isn't because they could do anything different. It's because they are limited to what they can do simply because they do not have the capacity or capability to do anything but to posture, protest, and stand to the side.
Thank you for that. A follow-up question. In your point of view, more capability than political and financial reasons why allies would not immediately want to jump in?
It depends upon the nation. Interwoven into all of this is politics. And I say this as a former NATO staff officer. I love NATO. I love the whole concept of NATO. I loved who I served with. My time in Afghanistan, I spent more time with our NATO partner nations than I spent with US. But because I have that affection and I know what they're capable of and what they can do, I believe that out of the sign of respect, that we should speak clearly with each other, as they're very comfortable speaking back to us in some ways. And people who've been stationed in Europe know this, that there are a couple of undercurrents that can be quite powerful in Europe for the political side of the house that folds into national security. One, there is just this normal, latent anti-Americanism that you run into. I served with a Norwegian major who really just hated the U.S. Only time he'd been to the U.S. is he spent a year at the Army Staff College in Fort Leavenworth. So whatever y'all did to him out there didn't help our Norwegian relations. But he was the exception, not the rule. But you also have, especially in Europe, and especially in France, and to a slightly lesser degree in Germany, a desire for EU primacy over NATO. They'll say North America, but they don't mean Canada too. They mean the US. They are very resentful of the power and influence the US has in NATO alliances. And the EU military structure is so hobbled with national caveats and bureaucracy. And having done a few exercises with them, it's funny, some of the stories you can hear, especially when the Greeks and the Turks start throwing things at each other. But they see any opportunity to attack the US presence in Europe as manifested by NATO. They see it as a zero-sum game where if we can get people detached from a relationship to the US, then the EU becomes more important. And this has been going on since Charlemagne divided his empire between his three sons. We don't have a Lotharingia anymore, but we do have a Francia and a Germania over here on either side. So the Germans and the French are doing what they've been doing for over 1,000 years. Is one of them wants to be able to bring together in this, Napoleon called it the continental system. If we can get all these disparate, tribalistic ethno-states of Europe to work together as a coordinated unity, the latest manifestation of that is what used to be the European Economic Community is now the EU trying to be political. If we can get this under our control, we can direct this sum of all the constituent parts together to pursue X, whatever X is, as defined by the French or the Germans is in the best interest of Europe. If they can make the EU more substantial than NATO, and now the EU doesn't have the UK in it as well, so the old keeping the Anglo-Saxons out applies now because at least the Brits are out, though the Italians, or not the Italians, well, yeah, the Italians are in, but the Irish are in. That's to their benefit. Yes, there's a lot of political involved in this. There's also national habits. I'll use Spain as the latest example. The government they have right now is a radical leftist. It was kind of an exaggerated version of what Spain has always been. Yes, they were in Afghanistan. Yes, they were briefly in Iraq, but the national caveats and limitations, it was off the hook. So you have those habits, those hesitations. And frankly, a few of them are just used to having the US do a lot of their business. And then they can sit from the sides and make various comments that play well to their political constituency, which for some of these political parties, the balance of that constituency is a combination of those latent anti-American types that we were talking about before, and those who really are pro-EU, pro-NGO, pro-internationalist, and see the influence of the US as being counter to what they see as their primary goal, which is to grow the power of that side of the political spectrum. So yes, it's not just military capability. You're right. If I understand your question right, that there is also a large political aspect to this. And this is nothing new. This was true when Carter, Clinton, Obama was around as much as it was true when it was Reagan, Bush, and Trump. Just a little more exaggerated because the Europeans don't understand the right-left political spectrum in the US. They think it's similar to what it is in Europe.
Interesting perspective. Thank you for that very much. How about the American understanding gap? What's the one thing that Americans need the most to understand about the Strait of Hormuz and they're not getting from the traditional news coverage?
The one thing that I think would be helpful, but it's hard to explain. It used to be that the US got a lot of its hydrocarbons coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. That hasn't been true in a long time. We're self-sufficient. What people need to understand are two things. For decades, accelerated after the end of the Cold War, our modern economic system is based upon a few very fragile assumptions. One of those assumptions is a free flow of goods at market prices through the international sea lines of communication in the open ocean. Full stop. Nothing moves more economically than it does on water. Whether you're pushing a barge in a canal in Belgium, or you're getting one of these absolutely gargantuan oil tankers pushing it over to East Asia. And the vast majority of the hydrocarbons that come out of the Straits of Hormuz is going to Asia. It's going to China, Japan, Thailand, India, etc., Australia. Decisions were made by other people for decades that in North America and in Europe, we were going to deindustrialize. That doesn't mean you don't need manufactured product. You do. It's just being manufactured someplace else with almost slave labor and a lot of environmental pollution, but it's being done on the other side of the planet, so you don't see it. And you can be happy with your carbon credits and your deindustrialized economies. That works until it doesn't. When you look at supply chains and when you look at where raw materials are processed into usable products, that's in Asia. If their cost of energy increases to the point that it's no longer economically feasible for the hard industrial manufacturing to be done in Asia, and then finished product or refined supply chain materials that are then exported to the West to be put into value-added products, then your whole system starts to wag at the knees. So in a large way, more in the rest of the world than in North America, really the Americas today, the whole world economy runs on that assumption. Another thing is it's not just hydrocarbons in the traditional sense of oil and liquefied natural gas. It's fertilizer that's derived from natural gas. And the Malthusian theories that came out in the late 60s, early 70s, where the whole world was going to starve to death because of overpopulation, that was negated because of the Green Revolution. It was a combination of very good agronomy, which was selectively hybridizing and breeding grains, so it's more productive and more resistant to various diseases, but also the wide use of fertilizer. And a lot of those fertilizers are not natural fertilizers. They're a byproduct of natural gas. You also have, as a byproduct of natural gas production, which is why the US had helium and Germany had hydrogen. Helium is a byproduct of natural gas production as well. And this is getting a little bit in the weeds, but hydrogen, like other noble gases, are absolutely essential for doing a lot of the very high-tech computer chip manufacturing and fuel cell development, et cetera, and so forth, to be able to enable this 21st century technology. And so that's helium. People don't understand that. They don't understand the fertilizer. But what they really don't understand is the fact that we really do have an international system here. And if you want to stop the pressure of migration, economic migration, you need to have strong economies in Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines. You need, if you want to have a strong buffer against an expansionist China, you need strong economies in Vietnam, Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia, and New Zealand. That can't happen if they cannot get access to hydrocarbons at market prices.
Thank you for sharing that. In fact, the cost is one of the things that I'm most curious about. I think you answered some of that, and that is the value proposition for America's taxpayers, for example. We're spending $20 billion in maritime insurance as of late. I think that's the current offering to backstop the Gulf shipping.
Right.
And we're spending lots of money on equipment, individuals, personnel, military, hardware, software. That all comes at a great cost to taxpayers, particularly many of whom, that I talk to on a regular basis say, well, Bill, China imports 11 million barrels a day to those lanes. India, 5 million, Japan, 3 million, South Korea, 3 million, European, etc. Goes on. And so the value proposition for Americans, any follow-up comment on that?
If everybody existed in a silo, I think that argument would have some merit. There was an interesting review of, and I'm not picking on them, but I am, in the UK, the Labour Party members of parliament, with literally just a handful of exceptions, before they became members of parliament, they were working in either government or NGO, nonprofit sector, or were just party functionaries. So, and you have that in a lot of these governments where they don't have enough people in positions of power who know how money works. They don't know how economies works. They don't know how interconnected mechanisms are. And they also are caught up in blue shirt, red shirt politics, such that the discussion that we just had is secondary to the fact that their political power derives from maintaining their coalition. And if their coalition is largely anti-American and especially anti-Donald Trump / Republicans, because a lot of what they're saying about Donald Trump, I heard about Bush 43 and I heard about Reagan when I was a little kid. And nothing new here. It's a different guy who's just a little more American and therefore a little more irritating to these people. So they're doing things out of spite and out of anger. And they don't want to be seen for their political supporters and their political parties in their countries who have been whipped up one way or another. They think that if they build up a strike route to go help escort ships through the Straits of Hormuz, that they will be, quote, part of the conflict, unquote. And we saw recently that the Italians have joined the Spaniards and have taken away our base utilization privileges for anything that's involved in the strikes on Iran with Israel. So they're not going to do it, even though it is much more in their best interest, because it would hurt the American economy in the long run if the Strait of Hormuz is not opened up in the next few months. But it will, by orders of magnitude, hurt more India, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, all those countries you talked about before, and the Europeans for that matter. But as it stands right now, they're more interested in seeing it not part of what Israel and the U.S. is doing. And you also cannot discount the 800-pound gorilla in the room. The U.S. is conducting military operations with Israel. And if people aren't willing to open their eyes to what we're unfortunately experiencing right now, something that's been in the West for a couple of thousand years, the fact that this operation has an Israel stamp on it that we are working with, that automatically is triggering large portions of especially the European electorate that have an exceptional anti-Israeli bias for reasons that are probably best explained by themselves that are confessing.
We've had financial models before where countries have paid financially for our protection, right? That's existed.
I guess in theory it could, but I don't see A, that there are people willing to pay it. And B, I'm not a big fan of the concept. America is, and hopefully will be for a while, a voluntary military. These are the sons and daughters of American citizens who are volunteering to serve their country. If we do anything that even smacks or sniffs of being somebody else's mercenary force, I don't want to explain to somebody's mother and daughter why why their kid is coming home in a box because somebody's paying us to do their job for them. Now, indirectly, do we have mutual defense arrangements where we perhaps have a greater burden? Yeah, maybe possibly, but you can argue one way or another. But having somebody else pay outright, that makes us not much better than why is Bangladesh so involved in UN peacekeeping? Because they like the money that comes in. So I don't care what operation was. If we were doing it and somebody was cutting a check for it, that would be a big negative for me. Now, if it was something like we're doing an operation in location X and Iceland would really like to help us, but they don't have a military. But what they will do is they will buy Y gallons of diesel fuel. Then that's fine. That's a contributing nation. Just like if you know anybody in the Daughters of the American Revolution, you don't have to actually have an ancestor who fought in the American Revolution. You could just been somebody who drove a wagon full of supplies to George Washington once, and you'll qualify. So service and resources in lieu of contributing forces, that's one thing. But just treating us like a mercenary force, that leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
The National Commission serving the future of the Navy has met and will continue to meet in 2026. And I have a question. If you were advising the commission today, not on ships necessarily, but the structural questions that they should be asking, what are the 2 or 3 things they absolutely can't afford to skip?
I think you have to back up for a second and say, why do we even have a commission for the future of the Navy to exist in the first place? The reason is it has been established that the people and institutions who have been given stewardship over our maritime power in our Navy have done such a poor job over the course of the last 3 decades that the political structures have felt the need to create this commission. Therefore, back up, what are those big pixel dysfunctions that we have done since Goldwater Nichols came around in 1986? I think my answers are unsexy, but foundations of houses are unsexy too. Plumbing is unsexy as well, but you can't have a functioning house without solid foundations and well-running plumbing. I have experience in most of those things is why it came to mind. But first things first, it has to do with the only reason that we won World War II is because of our industry and our maritime industry. For the future of our Navy, we have got to find a way to have better incentives and disincentives such that we have a geographically and institutionally diverse industry and support structure that not only will underpin a modest but not insignificant merchant fleet, but also a Navy that is well maintained. It is completely unsatisfactory that we have submarines sitting for over a year waiting for repairs, that we have limited dry dock facilities such that ships are getting depot level maintenance and other things in 2026 at a rate that would have gotten everybody fired in 1986. So the answer is the incentives and disincentives to grow and support and sustain the industry. That's going to take a decade to fix, probably. I think also we need to change the incentive and disincentives of our officer corps, how we promote people and why. Because the system of incentives and disincentives that we have right now are not fit for purpose. If they were fit for purpose, we would not be in the situation that we're in right now. Full stop. We also need to look very carefully at how the nation sees its Navy. And I think there's two soft ways of doing that. If we adjust the incentives and disincentives that we have for who we're getting to the highest levels, perhaps they'll be a little more outspoken and extroverted, and people know more about the Navy. But I think one of the big failures that we had after 1986 was the U.S. Navy has disappeared from the view of many Americans. What is geographically the best place to have Navy facilities in the world also happens to be the center of a lot of new technology and influence in America, San Francisco Bay Area. We allowed myopic and poorly aligned politicians to have us rack our way out to the San Francisco Bay Area. The military has effectively decamped from New England. There used to be Air Force bases and naval bases all over New England. Now there's just a shadow of the shell of what used to be. The master base concept that we came up for our aviation in the 1990s is something that only a Soviet 5-year planner or an accountant would find effective, especially now that we have the decentralized threat of drones popping out of cars that can take out entire air wings. We need to be located in places other than San Diego, Jacksonville, and Norfolk. And we need to get the fleet out, smaller bases, and that would be some of the bold-faced items that I would look at. But we also need a larger thing that I've called for a while. Everybody was screaming about how we need a national maritime strategy, et cetera. Yeah, that's kind of true. But what we need worse than that is we need a national understanding. We haven't told our story very well. By geography and economy, we are a maritime and aerospace power, but our budgetary priorities, regardless of how big the budget is, does not reflect that fact. And the other things I talked about for the national tradition of the Navy, all those things require funding, requires money. We're going to get that money. It's going to have to come from what is not our comparative advantage, what is not our natural structure from national defense point of view. We're not a continental land power. It's going to come from the Army. And we have to be willing to make that fight. We have to be willing to argue our position. And a lot of it is a byproduct that everybody wants to be joint. His name is slipping my mind right now, which explains a lot. But I think it was 2 vice CNOs ago, not the guy that was sent to jail for fraud, the guy after him, I believe. When he went up for his confirmation hearing, every other sentence had the word joint in it. Fewer of that, more of Vice Admiral Tom Connolly and the great fight against the Navy, the F-111 Bravo. That's what we need. And we don't have that right now, but we need it.
What would you like those in the Navy and those civilians that may listen to this podcast? What would be the key takeaway for them? What would you like them to know?
There's an opportunity here, kind of building off what I said before. We've got a couple of talking points, arguments that is not spin. It's not developed in some PAO terranium hothouse. It's facts on the ground, ref A through Zulu of why we need a Navy. Every time that we have an aircraft carrier or a destroyer deployed for 9, 10, or 11 months, that's a demonstration we don't have a large enough Navy. Every time that we have airfields ashore that are attacked because they're static, that's an argument for having your power projection and your aircraft at sea, not ashore. Every time that we have a threat, whether it's Somali pirates or whether it's the Houthis throwing Gen 1 anti-ship ballistic missiles at merchant ships, The only way that can be addressed is at sea. And when we have neighbors, such as those off South America, who a not insignificant part of their economy are small town fishermen who go out there and barely eke a living off of fishing, and they have hundreds of Chinese fishing boats saturating their territorial waters and strip mining their seas, but they don't have the capacity or the professional ability to know how do we enforce and secure our fishing grounds on our territory. We've got a Coast Guard, we've got navies that can help them with. The threat in the Western Pacific, the Chinese threat that everybody's talking about, that is going to be a maritime and an aerospace fight. The requirements that Australia, New Zealand, Japan, the Philippines, all of our friends and allies in the Pacific, what do they most need help with? They need help securing their maritime connections and their airspace. So that's what people who have a passion for the Navy, what they should be doing right now is looking around them, is whether you're in the Red Sea, whether you're in the South China Sea, or you're off of Peru and Ecuador. The challenges that we see right now all have to do with security and the economic importance of the seas. We have the argument and the points delivered to us on a plate. Everybody can make those arguments, can make that sale. And we need more people to do it because I've been very, very frustrated for a while that all the stars are aligned, all the argument points are right there delivered for us. But we've got some of our senior leadership up who all they want to do is they want to talk about joint, or worse, they don't want to talk at all. And it's a missed opportunity. It's not just parochial either. It has to do with the security of our republic. And our security of our republic, we have a very secure border to our north and south. Our concerns in Europe, the Europeans have a larger population than we do and a larger economy, depending on how you measure it, than we do. They can perform all the land component and most of the air component requirements that they have. We don't need to get our land forces engaged in another land war in Asia. That never works out well for us. But we do have ways that we can help secure our allies in the sea and in the air. Those are the arguments we need to make, because if we have a war that comes, kind of like what we're seeing right now off of Iran, what's the best thing for America? If we can limit our military impact to sea power and air power, then we're not going to find ourselves in a gooey goo swamp land war in Asia that doesn't work out really well for a maritime and aerospace power that is literally on the other side of the planet. That's what I would like to see more people to make that argument with, because it's such an easy argument to make.
So thank you for that. Well, you've been very gracious for allowing me to take 45 minutes of your day, particularly in light of the amount of things that are going on. Thank you on behalf of the strongernavydotorg organization and for the community that I represent and served in. Thank you for all that you've done for the Navy, sir, your service, and most definitely for your time today.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.